Mr. Bruce, I don't know to introduce your speech first or your free badge first because I'm looking up here. If this is your free badge speech today, that's a lot of stuff.
Oh, that's going to be worth some money.
That's going to be worth more than what you paid for.
I got the free badge for 4 weeks.
4 weeks worth? All right. Sir, you have the floor.
By the way, by the time I get through, I think by the next time it comes time to bid for the free badge, you're going to say, hey, I don't want him to have it again, so I can bid it up a long way.
That's what they did to me.
First of all, I've been a member of the Union of Concerned Scientists for almost 40 years now. And one of the things we try to do is to bring scientific issues before groups, and this is what I intend to do today. It's about the number of nuclear weapons we have. Now, I was introduced to nuclear weapons in the 2nd grade as I was hiding under my desk, and I had a whole wall of windows next to me, and the teacher's explaining to put our hands behind our necks, close our eyes, and I remember thinking, I'm on the 1st floor. If the 2nd floor comes down, I don't think this desk is going to help me very much. And thank goodness we never had to play the game. Anyway, some things about nuclear weapons. I should also mention that I studied them, of course, in college, as in physics, and also taught about it in high school. One of the things you'll hear me talk about is the half-life of various substances, okay? Uranium specifically, or plutonium. Half-life means this. Let's say that on day 1, there's 100 Rankins, I'm just putting out for you, 100 Rankins of radiation given off, okay? And we'll say the half-life of uranium, and it's not, but the half-life is 10 days. So 10 days after that, the potency is cut in half. It's then 50%, 50 Rankins. 10 days after that, it's 25 and so on. So that's the concept of half-life, the kind of product. I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a couple of minutes here. The bomb that was dropped over Hiroshima killed approximately 100,000 people, okay? Approximately, give or take, I'm not sure, okay? The bombs that we have today that bomb was measured in kilotons, 1,000 tons of TNT. The bombs we have today are measured in megatons, 1,000,000 times. A million sticks of TNT. That's a lot of power out there. Okay, I want to kind of demonstrate what this means. Essentially, the weapons of today are at least 15 times the strength of the one that dropped over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This is represented by 1 BB. Okay? Now, all of the munitions used by the Allies in the 2nd World War can be represented by 6 BBs. That's all the munitions used by the Allies in the 2nd World War. Again, in today's terms, these 6 BBs, they're hard to pick out of the hand. That would be enough nuclear weaponry to wipe out every major city in Russia. Okay? That's what we're dealing with today. Now, during the height of the Cold War, there's some calculations made, primarily started by Dr. Carl Sagan. And they determined that it would take about 50 nuclear weapons to cause a nuclear winter. This is because there's so much debris blown into the air, it blocks out the sun for at least a year, probably 2, crops will fail, mass starvation. And I'm not even mentioned radiation. Radiation knows no boundaries whatsoever. Okay? So essentially, if you're using a nuclear weapon, to kill your neighbor is to also kill yourself. So they're worthless at this particular rate. So here's what 50 bombs sound like. Okay, that's all it takes to cause a nuclear winter. Now, we talked about radiation, what it sounds like. Here's an example. Can you hear that? You don't want to hear that, okay? This particular machine happens to be out of calibration. If that much radiation was coming down, we would all be bleeding from the nose, vomiting, all kinds of bad things happening to us. It should sound, and I don't know if I can make you do this, what happens, this has a 5-year guarantee, it's about 30 years old. This is, you should hear about one click every couple of seconds. The thing I want you to notice is irrational, irregular. It doesn't have any rhythm to it. But that's what radiation sounds like. It's happening to us all the time. It's one of the causes of radiation. It causes cancer. It hits maybe a cell, which changes things, which causes irregular growth. Now, this is what we're going to talk about, the amount of weaponry that the United States alone has. Okay? Please listen to this. You kind of want to say stop. Okay? That represents 6,000 nuclear weapons. The good news is that's been reduced from 30,000 nuclear weapons to 6,000. So the Soviets, who had 30,000 during the Cold War, are now down to about 6,000. It seems to me that it's just a few too many. Okay? I don't know how many is enough, but I'm pretty sure we have more than enough right now with 6,000. Now, a couple other things we should mention. I need to get back to a note for this, I think, because I don't think I have the numbers memorized. They're expensive. They're expensive to build, they're expensive to maintain, they're expensive to keep secure, and they're expensive to decommission. All those are expensive. Does anybody have any idea how much we spend on nuclear weapons in the United States in 1 year?
About $1 trillion.
That's a little high. $50 billion. $50 billion in 1 year. Okay. Does anybody know how much we spend on defense in the United States in 1 year?
On what, John?
$642 billion on defense.
Oh, defense.
Okay? And 50 billion of that is about nuclear weapons. The other thing, the sad thing is, the Soviets also have 6,000. We have a treaty that's slowly brought them down, but we're backing out of it. The second thing is that if we take the other nations, there's 7 now that we believe have nuclear weapons. If we take all of those and add their nuclear weapons to theirs, ours plus the Soviets plus theirs, 15,000 nuclear weapons out there that are waiting to blow us up. And I'll just kind of leave you with that, and that's what my first free badge is for. I'll take it off. Do something else now. Any questions?
You gotta love science teachers with free badges.
All right. Now the next discussion is on radio. Well, by the way, if you'd like to see a chart, this is defense spending by us and by others. Okay? And this is a paper that talks about the other countries that have nuclear weapons and how many they have. Earl, would you get somebody else to help you pass those out? One per person? I guess I should first start out by kind of reminding us all about why I am using this radio for a particular point. All of us have had actually information given out here about the Cascadia rising. This is that 9+ earthquake that's predicted to happen off of the west coast. Having once again taught geology, we understand that we're not one big solid earth. We kind of wiggle back and forth, and when one plate works against the other, one slides. It's like a rubber band. After it's snapped back, it goes back and forth. This is what happens. We're pretty sure that the big 9+ earthquake happens about every 300 years because it was recorded in oral history here. But in Japan, they recorded the tsunami as it came across. The bad news is, I guess, is that we're 50 years overdue. Okay? But in geological time, that's nothing. let's talk a second about geological time. If we took out a piece of adding machine paper that was 15 feet long, and at this end that begins the formation of the Earth. We talk about how it formed, the things that came on board. Humankind comes on board about 1/8 of an inch from the end. We're the new kids on the block. We're doing lots of different things. We should be preparing for some of these natural disasters a lot better than we are. So what does this has to do with radio? In 1972, I became an amateur ham. I'm going to throw out an offer to you. I have a radio that's much like this. It's a little bit older, not quite as complicated, but it's actually a better radio. Anybody in this group that is an amateur ham or who would be willing to take a very short class, get the technician license, and become an amateur ham and work with us at the hospital, the radio is yours. So that's kind of a bribe to start out with here. And think about it. And I just love to work with you to get some more people in there.
Did you learn all that at Fort Huachuca?
Pardon?
Did you learn all that at Fort Huachuca?
No, I learned that after I was through with the Army. I did work with it at in Puerto Rico,
Oh.
but I wasn't an amateur ham then. But that's what got me started. Back to where we were with being an amateur ham. There's several different classes: technician, general, and an advanced or extra. I'm a general. Technician, I'll show you a little bit what technician does. Let me have you go to your charts, if you would please, that you have in front of you. And I want you to turn to this side of the chart. You see which one it is? And we're going to talk about these two little radios right down here. Okay? Now, I'll explain to you what a 2-meter radio is in a little bit. But if you look at that black line that goes from one radio to another, that's called simplex. There are certain frequencies that we put into our radios that we use to call one another. They're called simplex calling features. Not features, calling frequencies. And all I do when I press a talk, I would call another person like KL7AQX, KL7AQX. This is WL7BMQ. That's my call sign. If my friend's listening at that time, he would report back or she would report back with their call signs. At that point, we establish a different frequency to go to so we don't tie up this one. And we have one in each band. And I'll explain to that a little bit later too. Okay, now dropping down to the next portion. Radio, but down here there's another radio in the middle. Okay? This is called a repeater. Now what that means, I can get out with this particular radio 10, 15 miles, 2-meter bands are line of sight. There's other bands called high frequency bands. They are long range. They can bounce off a thing called the ionosphere. I speaker and it goes through the radio, it goes up the waves, they hit the ionosphere, they bounce back down, they bounce back up again, and somebody out here may be able to pick them up. I have a friend in Alaska that he sent a message to himself and went all the way around the world. And he could pick up about a second and a half later, here was his own call sign coming back to him, which is kind of cool. You know, we can do that. Okay, so anyway, back here to what this repeater does. Inside of these radios, there's a mechanism that will cause it to switch frequencies for you. So what happens, I think the frequency I used on this one was, what, 146 point something? Yeah, it's in orange down there. 146.500. I would call on that frequency. What happens, there's another radio, much like this but bigger, sitting up on a mountain someplace. It's up high, so line of sight's better. It picks up my message, drops it down 600 meters on frequency, and it goes to the other radio. It receives that message from me on a slightly different frequency. That ham picks up his radio, he answers, it goes off once again, that would be in the red line, that's the sending one. It goes to the repeater, it's stopped down, and I hear it on a different frequency that's not listed on my radio, it's inside the radio. So that's why you need to know about repeaters. Now I'll explain why that's important. With Cascadia Rising, there's a whole bunch of people in this community working together to try to get communications under control. After any disaster, and I've worked on several by the way, the #1 problem is always radios, communication. Part of it's economics. The police department gets funds and they up their radios, so now they have a different type of frequency that's being used. Now the fire department didn't get the award, so they're still on the other frequencies. They really can't talk to each other very well anymore. Okay? Then pretty soon there's another upgrade with another entity. Maybe it's the EMTs. No, they're usually with the fire department. maybe the state patrol. So it's the technology that's the problem, not just the speaking. What happens with hams, we kind of stay on the same bands all the time. Looking at the other side of this sheet, you see this chart down here. Okay, now I'll put up a picture here of this one. This is in a larger format. This has to do with all the different bands I can use as a general class ham operator. Okay? The green ones are mine. No, I shouldn't say that they're for talking. The red ones are for Morse code and so on. Now, the technician is limited. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a little bit. But this is what we have to do with the number of bands and what we're working with. Now, back to how this works. When Cascadia Rising came up, we realized, or we were told by the federal government, that because of our long runway, Redmond will become the staging area for the whole state of Oregon. Now, this has a lot of responsibilities. We have mountains between us and Portland, but we can get supplies in from the east. We can fly things in. Hopefully, runways will be repaired quickly because other things, the roads and so on, are not probably going to be passable. What about the amount of damage at the coast? With the 9+ earthquake, probably most of that is going to be destroyed. Hopefully we have early warning system enough to get people up in the mountains to get out of the tsunami. At the Portland, Salem, so-and-so area, that side of the mountains, they're going to be moderate damage, but still significant. Here, minor damage, maybe things falling off a shelf now and then, pictures raising and so on. So that's another reason we were chosen. Okay? Now, what happened, we realized that with all these different kinds of frequencies out there in radios that may not talk, because hams stay with the same bands, we've been asked to help out kind of as a last resort. Now, the hospitals particularly are vulnerable because they have to send complicated messages back and forth to one another. Complicated prescriptions, or names for prescriptions, maybe charts and diagrams. So what's happened is that they put in, they came to HIDAR, which is the High Desert Amateur Radio Group. That's primarily in Bend. We try to service all of the small communities around. When the hospitals came to us and said, hey, we're concerned, what we will do, we will give you a space to set up radios, we will help you buy the radios, and we will give you electricity. You can be part of our bank for 7 days afterwards. Please remember that if this big one happens, probably cell phones will be out, telephones will be out, maybe electricity will be out. It's going to be a real problem. So this is a nice thing for us. Well, we said, okay, we have these repeaters. Remember what I just talked about to extend the line of sight? We're going to put solar cells on each one so they continue to work and make sure they're well grounded. Hopefully they'll survive whatever earthquake it is. Right now, with this small radio, which puts out 10 watts, I can talk to people in Burns, okay, with this small radio. Now the big boys, and I'm not a very big boy when it comes to radio stuff, they're the ones that work with the high frequency, the high frequency bands, the essentially 10 meter up to 160 meter. They are the ones that can bounce off the ionosphere. So my job would be get a message to them if they need to get it out of the valley. This links to hospitals because we can talk radio to radio. But let's look at one more thing on the back of this side of it. Okay, take a look at this little room up here. This is the Redmond Emergency Radio Room. Let's look at number 1. Maybe I should get my glasses on here so I can follow along. There's a computer in that room. And on that computer, there's a device called WindLinks, a program. What this is email that can be sent over radio waves instead of through the internet. Now, it's not easy to use. There's about 6 steps you have to use just to get up to where you print in the message. But the nice thing is, we can put a thumb drive into the computer with a diagram or a picture or a diagnosis or a list of medications or patients, type it in, send it to this next little box. You see the number 2 up there on the right-hand side? That is called the TNC, the Terminal Node Controller. What that does, the zeros and ones that are in a computer that talks to one another, it puts them into a format that can be transmitted through the air. Okay? Then another radio, someplace else, can pick that up. Then that's sent down to the number 3, which is a radio that sits just below that little box. Okay? That radio sends the message out through the antenna, number 4, and the process is reversed in another hospital emergency room someplace in the valley here, so they can talk to one another and send to one another. Now, we also, if you look at number 5 down there, which is kind of in the middle, no, excuse me, we're going to look at number 5. This is a voice radio. There's 2 radios, they're identical radios. One set for frequencies that let us do the wind link and send written messages. The other is for voice, so we can talk to one another in 2 different bands, high frequency and very high frequency and ultra high frequency. Which, let's make us look at the other side of the chart again. You see this long arrow that points up to this, looks like a people standing there? All of your radio bands fall in this group. If you look up above that, there's a little box that says radio. Okay, what does that mean? Well, first of all, to ham radio operators, it means that if you're an HF frequency, these are the long waves, they can be from about 30 feet up to about 450 feet, to 1.5 of lengths of a football field. To get really good reception with a very simple antenna, that antenna has to be 450 feet. This is why I'm not a very good ham. I live in the city in an HOA, and they frown upon having a 450 loop going around the neighborhood, and I don't know why. They also frown upon having a different kind of neighborhood. They have other kinds of antennas that have essentially fingers that reach out, and they're only maybe this wide, but they have to be at 30 or 40 feet. HOAs also kind of frown upon that. You need 2 things to be a good ham, a good radio, which I've built and have one, but I'll never have a good antenna. And I will say, I don't want to. I want to respect my neighbors. However, I can get a waiver if we ever have an emergency, I can put up a big antenna. Now, a couple of other things you probably know. Someone asked about what is a 2-meter radio. This is the most popular radio in amateur ham right now, because when you get your first license, this permits you to use this radio, which is 2-meter, which is the very high frequency. And then you go down to the ultra high frequency, you can use that. And if you probably can't see it on the chart, but all the green lines down here in the bottom right-hand portion, those are open to the very first level, technician. I have a general license. I'm open to almost all of the other bands, but the really important guys called the amateur, this extra is what it's called now. If you have that, there's certain portions of the band that I can't use that they can. I've started that test 3 times. Got to about page 40, it says, this is baloney. This is all theory. I'm never going to use it. As far as I'm going, it's going to be with the jet. I will kind of open it up. Well, let me talk about one other thing here. See if I can not drop some BBs. To set up a station, I grab my radio. And let's say, well, one of the things to tell you, this particular radio can act like a repeater station. So I can go out with my car and park up on some high mountain. And all the radios that can reach me, line of sight, that can then be passed on to another radio over here that's farther away. You know, I said maybe a 10-mile limit. So if there's 30 miles apart, I'm going to be able to relay that message without doing a thing to my radio. It just sits there. I can also talk on it back and forth with what we call the simplex. So this radio comes along. We also need a way of charging it. I set this is charging at home. I just plug it in and it goes. I'm about ready to run out of time here. Second thing is, I can take this antenna off. I put this antenna on with this extension, and now I can extend out to probably 40 miles with this antenna. So my point is, with this little tiny kit, earphones for help, an extra battery, and a converter for I can work it out of my car, that's all I need to head up, set up a radio station and get it going. I know we're out of time. If you have any questions, though, I'll be glad to answer them after the meeting.